Hello everyone, it's Caroline or Miss B Overseas. Thank you so much for joining me today for what is going to be my fourth and final end of week wrap up for the month of April. I'm well aware that we are a good chunk into May. This just really proves that no matter what format that I try my wrap-ups out in, whether it's end of month or end of week, I'm just always going to put off wrapping up books at the end of the month. I know that about myself. I recognize that about myself. I still wanted to create this video so that way I could talk about the books that I read in the last week of April. So I'm gonna go ahead and tell you about those now. I think that I'm gonna go ahead and start out with a book that I brought up in my last end of week wrap up. I was listening to it on audiobook and I was a good chunk of the way through it in that last weekly wrap up, but I didn't finish it until just now, and I think it's because I was listening to it on audiobook, and just with the way that I listen to audiobooks, I can't just do it exactly at my leisure. I have to be doing specific things to listen to audiobooks. Have I even said the title of the book yet? It's Salvage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward. I described it pretty in detail in my last end of week wrap up, but just in case you weren't here for that, this is a kind of adult literary family examination. If I could put it in a category, that's what I would categorize it as. And it's broken up into 12 different chapters. And those 12 different chapters chronicle 12 days leading up to what is Hurricane Katrina. And it focuses on this one family in particular who is living in the bayou in Mississippi. And it's told from the perspective of the daughter of that family, who at the very beginning discovers that she is pregnant and she lost her mother when she was quite young. I found this story to be the perfect, or not perfect, I don't want to say that, but it was just such a poignant intersection between extremely compelling and then also extremely hard to read. And it was hard to read for a couple of reasons. Just the depiction of the disparities of rural impoverished America and kind of the gaps in equity that are shown for the whole world, especially when things like natural disasters occur. There's this one scene where Esh and her brothers are trying to prepare their house for the hurricane, and they actually end up having to sneak on to their white neighbor's property to steal supplies. And a big reason why they're able to do this is because their neighbors have the means to have already evacuated and boarded up their house. And the children of this family have to come together and formulate this plan to break into their neighbor's house to steal property in order to ensure that their home has a chance of making it against this hurricane. I mean, that subject matter is heavy to read about, but then also, and I think that I mentioned this in my last wrap up too, Jesmyn Ward's writing is so visceral and graphic to the point where at sometimes I had to pause my audiobook and like step away. Just her word choice and sentence structure, the way that she crafts these scenes, I felt like I was there, but they were so intense and so raw. There was one scene in particular that involved a dog fight, and I would say that I'm not someone who's particularly sensitive to animal harm, but just the complexity and the depth in her writing had me feeling this scene so intensely that I had to physically remove myself and walk away from the audiobook for a while. If I could read this book over again, I would try to get my hands on a physical copy, not because the audiobook didn't do a fantastic job. I thought the narrator was great. Again, it's just because of the brilliance of the writing. Some of it I wish that I would have had the words physically in front of me. And then as far as star rating, it's hard because I just finished it and I haven't had time to sit with it really. I think that I'm gonna go ahead and do a 3.5 star. I read another book from this series or collection. I still don't know how the books are connected, but I've read one more from this collection called Sing, Unburied Sing, and I definitely know that I enjoyed that one more than I enjoyed this one. It was a few years ago that I read that one, but I think I remember giving it 4 stars. So because I didn't enjoy this one quite as much, it was still brilliant, but because I didn't enjoy this one quite as much, I think it makes sense to put it at a 3.5. Okay, moving on to the next book that I picked up in the last week of April. It is The Love That Split the World by Emily Henry. This is YA speculative contemporary fiction. Completing this book means that I have read through the entirety of Emily Henry's YA backlist, and it's funny because I read her YA books in reverse publication order. So I started with the newest one and then I ended with this one, which was her debut, and I definitely enjoyed each one less than the one before, and I think that just speaks to her growth as a writer. So premise for this one, it focuses on a teenager named Natalie who is in her final months of high school. And we learn, I think, like in the very first chapter, that throughout her life she has been haunted by these kind of otherworldly spirits, and there's one in particular that is reoccurring that she refers to as her grandmother, and her grandmother will show up kind of in her dreams, but also kind of like in her reality and tell her these stories. Within the first chapter, at least within the beginning of the book, we get this scene where the grandmother shows up and tells Natalie that it is going to be the last time that she visits her. And she leaves Natalie with this very cryptic message that I don't remember it exactly, but it's something like, you have 3 months to save him. And then that's it. So Natalie is obviously left wondering what that means. And it is not soon after that that she meets this tall, dark, and handsome stranger that she learns eventually may or may not be from a parallel reality universe town to her own. So Emily Henry's other 2 YA books hooked me, gripped me from page 1, and I'm not gonna lie, with this one, it probably took a good 200 pages for me to get any kind of investment, but there was definitely a point where it hit its stride and I recognized things that I love. Other Emily Henry books that I've read, things like small town vibes, that kind of senior year existential dread, the kind of slight magical and fantastical influences, and then Emily Henry does write romances and relationships, not just romances, really friendships. I think she writes those really, really well. One thing that I wish that I would have known going into it, which is really, it's my own fault because I think it says it in the synopsis, but I wish that I would have known going into it, is that the main character is half Native American, and we discover at the beginning that she was adopted at a very young age and has grown up in this white household. Natalie's identity is a big part of this book. So it's one thing for a white author to write from an experience that is not their own, but once I kind of got the feel for how much of the book was going to focus on that aspect of the character's identity, I kind of started doing some research, just because this is so much of a backlist title, and I was wondering if I could find Own Voices reviews or just see if there was any sort of conversations that had already happened. And I found this Twitter thread that I'm going to link down below, and it's from Debbie Reese, who reviews Native children's literature, or I guess like Native representation in children's literature. And one thing that she brought up in that Twitter thread was the representation of the Indian Children's Welfare Act in this book. Because the main character is adopted, that is a part of this story. And the way that Emily Henry writes Natalie's adoption process in this book, it definitely trivializes that law, which is so important because it does protect Native children. And then another thing regarding the Native American representation in here that I guess I didn't really realize until the end when I read the acknowledgements, is that Emily Henry also incorporates into this book several First Nations stories, and she incorporates multiple of these stories that are from different First Nations communities, and the way that she kind of stacks them up in here and the way that she uses them in this book, it's almost like she wanted to make it seem like they were all from this same community when the fact is it's not. They're extremely different and they're extremely unique unto the communities that they come from. So it just seemed to me like there was a lot of appropriation and misrepresentation. So I just thought that was worth mentioning because I definitely wish that I would have known that going into this, and I question if I would have even picked this up if I would have known that. If you're looking to get into Emily Henry's young adult stuff, skip this. Go to her other two. This is not worth picking up. I think that I'm going to give this probably around a 3 stars. Okay, and then lastly, the final book that I want to talk to you about. Can you already tell what my feelings are about it? I'm gonna try to repress them a little bit so that way I can tell you what the book is about. It's The Shape of Thunder by Jasmine Warga. I did get an e-copy of this through NetGalley, so it comes out May 11th, I think, so just in a few days. This is a middle grade and it's hard-hitting contemporary. The story centers around these two girls named Cora and Quinn who were best friends but haven't talked in almost over a year, ever since Quinn's older brother committed a school shooting in which Cora's older sister was tragically and senselessly murdered. So the girls' friendship was ended extremely abruptly because of this, and they haven't spoken in over a year until one day when Cora leaves a box of scientific article clippings on Quinn's front porch doorstep, and all of these clippings of these articles have to do with wormholes and time travel, and the girls come back together again in order to try and devise this plan to find a wormhole and to travel back in time to try and stop Quinn's older brother from committing this violent school shooting and then subsequently killing himself as well. This was the second book that I've read from Jasmine Warga. I read her other middle grade, Other Words for Home, last year, and it was one of my favorite books of the year, and I am so confident in saying that this is absolutely going to be one of my favorite books of the year. It's my favorite book that I've read so far in 2021. Jasmine Warga's writing plus middle grade equals perfection for me. There were so many lines that resonated with me, a 27-year-old, so deeply. The themes of grief and loss and friendship and love were depicted so brilliantly, and not only did we have those, but just the light element of sci-fi and the scenes where these two girls who haven't talked to each other in over a year because of just such senseless violence coming together and exploring the woods behind their houses looking for wormholes. It was just so it was so special and it was so good, and I absolutely believe that this book is going to change lives, save lives. Cora and Quinn, I'm convinced, could save the world. If it's not already clear, I think that you should absolutely pre-order this, order this. I don't know when you're seeing this video. If it's before the release date, pre-order it. If it's not, please read it. It's so good. I am going to be begging and borrowing and stealing to see how I can get this, multiple copies of this, into my classroom. Oh, and if it wasn't already clear, it's 5 stars, 10 stars. It's so good. 5 stars, no questions asked. So that's all I have for you for my end of week wrap up for April, now that we're well into May. I don't know, I remember when I started this whole end of week wrap up thing out, it was because I was trying to see if I liked them better than my end of month wrap up, and I'm here to report that I am still indecisive as ever, and I don't know which one I like better. I definitely think that I'm not going to do end of week wrap ups in May, but I'm not gonna say that I'm never going to do them again. There were some things that really worked for me. I liked the end of week wrap-ups because I felt like I could say more, and especially in terms of editing, I didn't feel like I have to cut so much out. But then there were some things that just didn't work for me, just like my pace of reading isn't necessarily conducive to end of week wrap-ups. It's not like I necessarily finish a certain amount of books at the end of every single week. So then I ended up talking about a couple of books in multiple videos. So then that kind of leads into views, which I mean, everyone says it. I don't care about views, but end of month wrap-ups definitely tend to do better in terms of views. So yeah, I'm indecisive. I don't know what I'm doing. Well, I do know that I'm going to not do end of week wrap-ups in May. I'll just do a month-long wrap-up. I need to stop procrastinating. I've already procrastinated this video. I need to stop procrastinating and talking about stuff that doesn't matter on camera. As always, thank you so much for watching. I am so glad that you are here. I am so glad that you could join me, and I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and I will see you again very, very soon this time. I will see you again very, very soon. Okay, goodbye.